Welcome back to Coach Carlisle's Pursuit of Excellence show, the ultimate resource for supporting your athletic child. This show is being brought to you by Carlisle Performance Systems, located in San Jose, California, where we get business execs fit and keep them fit, and where we take athletes' game to the next level by improving their speed, agility, quickness, strength, power, and mindset. This is your host, Coach Dwayne Carlisle. I provide my 28 years of coaching experience at every level, youth through the professional, college, high school, and private sectors, to help you unpack the complicated world of youth, middle school, and high school athletics. There's a ton of information out there, and we like to be the filter to help you make the right choices to help your child elevate their performance. Today's topic is speed testing for athletes. Now, have you ever gone to an event, taking your son or daughter to a softball or baseball showcase, or you've taken them to a basketball combine where they've had to take testing measures? They've had to go through what would be like an SAT prep for their athletic performance. Football, you have these mini combines where they have to run a 40-yard dash. Basketball, they got to run a 75-yard dash or three-quarter sprint. Baseball, they run a 60. I don't know why they run a 60, but they do. Never could figure that one out. But they go through all these different testing measures. And you as a spectator, you're sitting there thinking, what does this all mean? Now, your kid is college bound. We typically know what the SATs are, and we know the purpose of the SATs and how it serves from an admission standpoint, how it serves the student athlete. But the tests, it's ambiguous. You'll see various testing devices being used. Some will use a handheld watch to time them in a 40. Some will use a vertical jump tester where they reach up and jump for the pegs, and some just jump off of a plate. What does this all mean? Are they the right tools that are being used? I've brought in the expert of all experts in this particular area, and his name is Coach Carl Valle. And he's going to unpack testing procedures. He's going to unpack various devices and how you should go about testing athletes. Many of you, whether you're a coach, whether you're a parent, you'll go out in the backyard or you go out to a track and you'll time your kid. You want reliable data. You want that data to be somewhat consistent with how they're testing at their particular combine or event. And so it's very important that you get some insight as to what type of things work and what's going to be reliable and what's going to give you information that you can use. So Coach Carl Valle, he is best known as a simplyfaster.com writer. He curates all the writers. He's written hundreds of topics on simplyfaster.com, which is one of the top go-to websites for training information. He is well read. He quotes research as though he wrote every single publication. That's how deep he gets into subject matter as it relates to performance measures. And he's just an unbelievable resource and wealth of knowledge. In addition to that, he's the owner of spikesonly.com. His Twitter handle is @spikesonly.com. He's internationally acclaimed in the field. He consults with many college coaches throughout the country, high school coaches, and elite level sports organizations with regard to how to set up their technology within their weight rooms so that it is cutting edge, and most of all, not only gives you the information, but he will work with you on how to use that information to drive the training process. Here we go, none other than Coach Carl Valle. Coach, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Coach, thank you. Thank you. I've been blessed to have read so many of your articles on Simply Faster. You've educated a lot of coaches throughout the world, and we're just glad to have you here for today's topic, speed testing for athletes. We're going to unpack a topic that's really near and dear to my heart, and that is choosing the most reliable and validated testing measures to get the information that the athlete needs to know where they are and improve their overall performance. So, Coach, here we go. Thoughts on testing for athletes?
This is a wide open subject, and this is when people talk about speed testing. Usually, if you're in America, you're thinking about the 40-yard dash, and you're saying, how fast can someone run a 40? But now with GPS and other technologies, people are looking at, well, how fast did that person run? Did they go 21 miles an hour? And if you're international, if you saw the World Cup, oh, wow, that athlete ran 37 kilometers per hour. So speed testing or speed timing or assessment is pretty confusing, and it's pretty wide open. There's a difference between track speed and, running on a straight line versus running in a game, for example, and how to interpret that information, because when you have 60,000 fans cheering you on, you're going to run a lot faster when you're in great shape than, when you're just starting out as a kid. So there's a big, wide open gap of how to take this information and interpret it. And I think that the best thing to do is to start how to actually test someone to see how fast they can run and to see the qualities or sub-qualities of how they accelerate, for example. So I think a good starting point is, let's look at three real big components of testing for speed. And let's start with linear speed. Is that a good idea?
Coach, I think that's a great idea.
So I think when people look at sports, they're going to say, well, we don't always run in a straight line. And that's true. I wrote a recent article about curve sprinting, and you see a curve sprint in rounding the bases in baseball, or someone trying to run around an opponent and kind of veer off a little bit. But the most important thing to look at is the fastest way from point A to point B is a straight line. So if a ball is hit in the outfield, you're not going to see an outfielder run in a serpentine format. They're going to go from point A to point B to get there as fast as possible. If someone's seeing broad daylight in football, they're going to run straight ahead. So straight ahead speed is a good foundation to seeing, hey, how fast can someone run? So what most of us are familiar with is usually a distance. So in football, a lot of people use a 40-yard dash. Baseball, 60 yards. But those are kind of arbitrary. Track and field is a 100-meter dash, but that's not really a good appraisal of your peak velocity. That's just how fast you can run a certain distance. So what we know, and based upon the practical science, is that an athlete has a capability of running at a certain speed. A toddler can stumble around and maybe go 3.5 meters a second, or barely a few miles per hour. But an adult running, let's say a 5K, can probably run around 7 to 8 miles per hour comfortably, in the middle of a race. A sprinter, let's say Usain Bolt, can hit a peak velocity of 44 kilometers per hour, which is pretty fast. It's around 27 miles per hour.
So, Coach, you're saying
those are the peak velocities.
So, Coach, if we're driving down the highway at 27 miles an hour, Usain would be right on the driver's side, knocking on our window. That's a beautiful illustration. I'm going to have to use that later. That is a gorgeous way to describe what someone can do. It's using the speedometer. I think that's what we're all comfortable with is, hey, how fast are you traveling? And that's an instantaneous speed. Now, building upon your analogy of using a car as an example, we know a Tesla can accelerate really fast in 3 seconds. So usually the test back in the day used to be 0 to 60
in how many seconds. So that's another way to look at time and space. So, but for practical purposes in sport, you usually use a distance and then you use a way to electronically time someone. And just because it's electronic doesn't mean it's actually automatic timing. So a stopwatch, for example, is, while it's a electronic piece of equipment, it's not automated, meaning it's requiring a human to start and stop it. And there's problems with manual timing. It's not as accurate. It's probably good to see rest intervals, like, okay, take a couple minutes off from a workout and using it as a timer. But it's not really good to actually appraise how fast someone can run, because there's a reaction time, and then the person that's looking at it has to have a perfect perspective of when they finish, and that's kind of eyeballing it. So hand timing or manual timing with a stopwatch is not electronic timing.
And Coach, on that note, it always amazed me. I've run several pro days when I was a collegiate strength coach. Here come the scouts into the field house. We have our electric timing system, our Swift timing system set up, one of the best timing systems on the market. And be it as it may, they go all the scouts down to the end in the 40-yard dash. They want to make sure that they have a little elevated seating set up, and they all get up on the top like it's a track meet. What do they pull out, Coach?
Their own stopwatch. Their own trusty, reliable stopwatch.
Hey, look, how about this? So then they never ask what the Swift time was. Never ask that.
No.
After all the players have been tested, they then huddle together like this little secret conference. The meetings of the mind. They compare notes, and then somehow they throw out times, like they take the high times, they take the low times, and they take the average time of what all 25 of the scouts got on their watch, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, because the times will range from one guy, let's say fictitious time, running 4:35, and then that same person was timed by another scout, same trial, in 4:48. So they're going to throw out the low, the high, and they arrive somewhere in the middle.
Hey, if they were with that narrow 2/10, I would be kind of pleased. But usually what happens is, a scout might be a little bit slow on their thumb, and now they're going to have a fast time. Or someone anticipates to start because they know it's manual timing, and the other thing happens where people are having slow times. So stopwatches, hey, it's someone's athletic. Yeah, you can see something there, but it's not enough to see if someone's making to compare to another athlete. So what you want to do with testing is to say, hey, if this athlete went somewhere else, would they have the same time, so it's a fair comparison? And that's why it's so important to make sure that the human element oversees the process, but it's not depending on the process. So, for example, you want to automate when they start moving, because that's when their intent is to run. And in track and field, you have reaction time. Hey, when did someone declare when they should run? And when should someone start running afterwards? Well, in most sport, it's continuous. The game is continuous. It's not about a starting gun. So you really care about when the person wants to start running to showcase their talent. So reaction time's not really involved. You can add that for specificity, but to make it easy to compare for everyone, you just want to know what the running time is. How fast can you run this and not add too many moving parts? And a good example of that is, okay, you're running a 40-yard dash. Run when you're ready. So we remove the reaction time. Now we got to deal with the number one problem with timing is first movement. How do you decide and declare that this person's intention is to start moving? Well, if you use a timing gate, and most of the equipment is a timing gate. They look like tripods, and they have a laser beam. And you pass the beam, that triggers the start. You pass the next timing gate, and that either gets you a split or it gives you the total time. Here's the problem with that. if someone has a fast hand and they trip it early, then someone that moves with their legs and pushing back and has a slower hand, well, that's an unfair comparison between athletes. What happens if you start changing your technique? So maybe you're taught to move your hands slow or move yourself behind the line more, so it gives you some more of a rolling start. My number one pet peeve, Coach, is when parents or coaches share their 10-yard split with me, and we're seeing 14-year-old boys in soccer academy running faster than Bolt. We know Bolt is one of the greatest sprinters ever, but he was a pretty good accelerator. So when I see all these, well, my kid runs this time, I say, no way, because how did they deduce what the first movement was? So we have to be honest about what is the protocol to evaluate how they're moving. A force plate, all these other technologies are not really practical for the average parent or a high school to assess. So we understand that usually a touchpad of when their hand's moving or putting a beam close to their center of mass is practical. So that's the number one issue, is that if you don't make the starting process fair and honest, you're going to get inflated times.
Gotcha. So then what would be some solutions to be able to capture accurate times for first movement? And what does a really good speed test look like? I know it may vary based on the athlete and the sport. However, what's a really good speed test look like, and what do you want to measure?
So a good speed test, treat it like you're fishing. The bigger the net, the more types of fish you can probably capture, and the smaller the spacings of the netting, the more likely to catch, not only more of the smaller details of the starfish, but you're more likely to make sure that you're capturing the entire run. So a good example would be, let's say someone is running 50 to 60 meters, Coach. All right. Well, that's great for an elite sprinter, but the reason it might not be appropriate for a middle school athlete is, they're going to decelerate a little bit at the end because they're going to get tired, and their ability to accelerate isn't as impressive as an adult sprinter. So a good sprint test is long enough to get you someone's peak velocity and precise enough to understand how they're getting there for the acceleration. So if a 40-yard dash is common, I would prefer to go to meters. But hey, most people are going to be comfortable with yards, and the field is painted in yards. But I would still measure the painted lines, Coach, because believe me, I've been to 10.3-yard football fields that look, they look very long to the eye, but just not long enough to really identify the problem. I've seen a lot of mismeasurements in the day. So the first thing you would do is try to get a distance of around 40 yards or 40 meters, and try to get a split and slice up the distance into 10-yard or 10-meter increments. Find a way to use a reliable way to gauge how they're first moving to get the starting process more automated, more accurate. It's not going to be perfect for most of the conventional timing solutions. And then you want to get the splits so that you can get the entire time, and then how they got there. Use the last split as an average velocity of their peak ability. So that last 10 yards or 10 meters, on average, is a good indicator for most athletes. Hey, how fast can you run? Split, convert it into miles per hour or kilometers per hour, and you get someone's peak velocity. And then you can get all the acceleration before that. That's probably the best way to test someone, is to have multiple splits, a good starting position that's reliable, whether it's a 2-foot standing start or a 3-point crouch start. That's what you want to use.
All right, Coach, let's take a couple scenarios with various sports. And why don't you give the audience a sense of what distance you would test and what you think of the distances that are commonly tested and what your recommendations would be. So let's take basketball. They got a 3/4 sprint test at the NBA Combine.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that? And would you modify that test? Do they get what they are seeking to measure out of that?
I think there's some value from getting a short acceleration. I mean, an indoor basketball court, modern one, we're dealing with, 30 yards in length. The issue with a basketball court, a practice facility, is not the distance or the limited distance of a basketball court, is how do you decelerate safely? So it doesn't matter if you have a 30-yard distance and they hit a wall. Well, around 20 yards, you're thinking about slowing down, so you might not be getting an accurate measure. So it's not so much the distance that they're testing; it's the facility that they're testing at. So, I have not visited a combine assessment in the NBA. I've been to Chicago during the combine. I know the test. I've seen it. I video. I think it's a fair measure of someone's acceleration. The issue with the NBA, it's not like the NFL. The NFL, you're running for dough. I've never seen in the NFL combine, the NBA combine, unless someone's injured, usually their acceleration doesn't determine their draft status. Number one is number one. So I think it's good to test. I think they should be testing with more value to every single step, coach, because the amount of space and separation in the game of basketball is more of a game of inches than football is. Football is yards per carry, right? How many yards did he throw? Basketball, everything's so much tighter. It's like indoor, like arena football, but even smaller. So they need to be more focused on every step, making everything appraised down to the step rather than 30 or 40 yards.
Coach, I know you've had extensive experience working with soccer athletes. Tell us about a soccer athlete that you work with that you tested, what test you used, and then what life was like before, and then what life was like after as a result of a training of intervention where you identified through your speed, through a speed profile, what they needed, and then train them accordingly to improve that.
Yeah, so it's ironic that you said so. I've worked with a post-college soccer player, a college soccer player, and a high school soccer player within the last week. And they're getting ready now. Some of them are already in school. Some of them just got to school, private schools. And the most important thing is, in my opinion, is to get both timing and video. Video tells the story of how they got there. The timing gives you a relative measure to not only compare, but how to use that. So what I like to do mainly, and this is the second error I see, is you want to have athletes, if they're doing a flying assessment, which is a 10-yard or 10-meter segment, sometimes 20 or 30, whatever distance you want to use, provided you have a good rationale, is fair to say. Now, you have to make sure that the athlete can gradually accelerate to their top speed in a comfortable manner. If you make them race to the line, sometimes you can get the last 10 of someone's 40 if they're skilled. Usually, you can get a better score and a better training effect if you add another 10 yards or 10 meters and have them smoothly and gradually accelerate. John Smith, one of the greatest sprint coaches in the world, always says, don't disturb the passengers when you're accelerating. And that's a really good analogy to what you're trying to do. You want to gradually, smoothly hit top velocity, and that means you got to add a little bit more of a runway space so you can get there in a comfortable manner. Once you have that, then you know someone's capacity for velocity. To contrast that and compare it properly, you want to have their first 10 yards or 10 meters, which is about 6 to 7 steps, depending on the athlete. And from there, you can see how they're overcoming inertia, which is really important in sports like soccer, because a lot of times you're walking and then you're making a play. So ability to separate with the ball and without the ball is very important. And once you're in the heat, you want to be able to do literally two things: be able to sprint at a high velocity and make a skilled decision in order to do something with or without the ball.
All right, Coach.
So that's the most important.
No, I appreciate that. That's awesome. What's more important to assess, acceleration or peak velocity?
I say peak velocity all the way.
And why?
I think peak velocity indicates someone's trainability and their talent a lot more than acceleration, because I think acceleration is more coachable and trainable. So a lot of people will be in striking distance from training. You know, a good coach can mask a lot of talent issues. You have to accelerate to hit peak velocity. So if you have a great capacity for speed, it's a lot easier to bring up their acceleration than the other way around. So I've never seen anyone have really bad acceleration or average velocity in accelerating that had really good top end speed. I just don't see it. Show me a 100-meter sprinter that's gone over 12 meters per second in a race and not been really dangerous for 30 to 60 meters, or even less than 30 meters. Everyone thought that Usain Bolt was, not a good accelerator when he's one of the best ever for 30 meters. So to say that, you can be really fast, but you're not good at acceleration, well, strength and conditioning can probably take care of most of the overcoming inertia demands of the sport. So I would say that peak velocity is more valuable.
So when you look at various sports, such as basketball, where they really reach top speed, soccer, where they rarely reach top speed, and
Sure.
other field sports, how do you address the argument that because they don't reach top speed, that acceleration is more important and should be focused on in the training process?
That's a good question. It's very common. Hey, most of the plays I see is 50 sprints in the game. They're usually short, right? And usually have a couple minutes between each play, right? That's the common question. Say, hey, they never reach the speeds or the distances that you talk about. That's a good point. Same thing with the weight room. Well, when they're in the soccer field, they're never doing any type of resistance besides their own body weight. And when they're running, they're never going deep in terms of joint angles. So why bother doing any peak velocity training at all, or why do any weight training? So the purpose of training is not to always be specific. It's just to either complement or raise the ceiling of your capability to do those events. Yeah, I want people to accelerate, but if you're already accelerating a lot in the game, what's the best way to prevent injuries when they're hitting their higher levels of velocities is to create an overload or an overspeed as a protective measure. So a good example would be, hey, if you're always running on the pitch of grass, running on a hard surface might create a protective benefit. They always use the inoculation analogy or metaphor of saying, hey, if you run at a higher velocity than the game, it creates a protective mechanism. Or if you do a surplus of strength, there's a reserve of protective qualities to that. You're always going to be running upright most of the game, and you're walking. So there's also a speed reserve benefit. If you can go really fast for peak velocity, there's also a benefit for that, because then your aerobic capacity, if it's sufficient, will move with you. So your average playing speed usually follows both your conditioning and your peak velocity. So yes, you might be accelerating most of the time, but you're always accelerating to your peak velocity. So there's also a term called terminal acceleration. That's your max speed. Well, terminal acceleration is when you can no longer accelerate. And what we want to do is have you accelerate more efficiently by really raising your height of your capability to accelerate by raising your target, which is top speed.
Outstanding. Appreciate that insight. All right, Coach, we're going to close with 2 questions here.
Fire away.
All right, Coach Carl Valle just started coaching. You're on a shoestring budget, and you understand, you listen to this podcast, you understand the importance of testing, that you need to test both acceleration and peak velocity and top end. How do you go about creating a reliable testing? How do you go about selecting your equipment on a shoestring budget to be able to make it happen?
There is no excuses for not timing. So if you just have a $20 bill in your pocket, that's as much as you need, because most people have a smartphone. And if you have a smartphone, you have, within the last couple of years, even the last 5 years, you can get really accurate timing with an app, and I like to use the Dartfish app. Now, the Dartfish app, with $7, you can actually get from point A to point B. You can use a mini cone, something from Dick's Sporting Goods, any marker, a shoe if you need to. You measure out a distance, and you can put, let's say it's 10 meters, you can get someone's ability to run 10 meters. If you want to get someone's sprinting max velocity time, you give them enough space to accelerate, and then you measure another 10 meters. And all you want to do is when the athlete passes by that first marker or first cone, use the tool called a chronometer, which is like a stopwatch, but instead of being unreliable and losing the accuracy and precision, it's extremely useful because you can slow it down and know exactly at the moment when their chest passes that line. You start it, and then throughout that passing of the next 10 meters, so usually about a second later, you'll get the closing time. So for example, on average, if you're a good athlete, you're going to run about a second in 10 meters, right? That's a meter per second. Okay, that's pretty fast. Let's say you go 1.1 seconds. Well, you can figure that out with the app. That's cost you $7. And that is from point A to point B, simple ways to get highly accurate scientific data.
All right. Now, Coach Carl Valle's got the big budget. You got an organization that came to, as many do, and they ask you, hey, look, what would the ideal testing equipment consist of? We want to do it. We want to do it at a high level. We're an elite level organization. What would that look like?
So you have 2 options if you want the best. The best is going to be either Muscle Lab or Swift. You talked about Swift earlier. You've used it. Swift is probably the most, it's the Cadillac of all timing systems. I have one right here. The new system is awesome. It's great for athletic timing because you can do a lot of things such as agility patterns, and it is also including something called a move sensor. So we talked about that at the beginning of the podcast. It has like a ultrasonic radar system to detect your first early acceleration. We're talking the first couple steps, not the first 10 meters. Next to that is the Muscle Lab system, which is you can use laser timing. So it's instead of beams that you passed, it's like having a homing device on you where the beam is on your back from behind, and every time you're moving, it's getting your continual speed versus splits. So instead of having something that's you take 40 yards and cut it up to 10-yard increments, it's getting every millimeter versus every 10 yards. So those are the 2 big options. Both are excellent.
And I would imagine with the Swift timing system, it has a dual purpose because, as you mentioned, You can set up different paths. You can set up different drills to use it as a training tool. Does the Muscle Lab laser system provide that ability as well?
Partially. The Muscle Lab is perfect for linear speed, 5-10-5, or a straight sprint. The multi-directional speed qualities is Swift. So if you put Swift into different patterns, it works perfect for agility. And what's great about it is you're getting more than just incremental splits. You're getting turning velocities and some other really granular data that you really need to know if you're dealing with elites.
Well, Coach, greatly appreciate all that information. I'm sure the listeners are taking notes at a rapid rate here. Coach, how can we get more of you? Can you give us your social media channels and platforms that we can reach out to you, that people can reach out to you?
The two best ways to reach out and create discussion is going to simplyfaster.com and reading my articles. All my articles are pretty much on Simply Faster. There's some podcasts that are out there that have some good discussions. And then on Twitter, I am Spikes Only there. Spikesonly.com is a way to contact me if you want something, personalized or consulting. But if you want to read up on what I'm talking about, there's plenty of free articles on simplyfaster.com. And I usually use my social media channel to post research or post good content that you should read, including a lot of information that has nothing to do with what I write, but when great authors, great coaches share very useful information, I like to share that on my social media channel.
That's one of the things I love about you, is that you curate the research and information out there with regard to performance topics. So I think that's an unbelievable resource. You've been a great educator to so many. Coach, I want to thank you for your time today. The next series that we're going to be doing is going to be on bar velocity, VBT, velocity-based training. So
that sounds great, and I hope on the next one we can start connecting how the weight room transfers to speed on the field or court.
All right, Coach, thank you, and you have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Coach Carl Valle providing great information that's usable. You can take with you if you have no budget, or you got a big budget and you want a cutting-edge testing system. He's provided that information for you. There's a couple things I thought that was really unique that he said, and one of them being how to develop a speed profile. And basically, it's a pretty simple process. You want to get that first 10. So if we were running a 40-yard dash and you were able to get splits, you would get the first 10 meters, and then you would get the last 10 meters. Or in this case, it's yards. You get the first 10 yards, you get the last 10 yards. First 10 yards is going to give you your low acceleration. The last 10 yards is going to give you your top end speed. He's got a formula where he calculates or converts your split, that last split, from 30 to 40 yards into miles per hour or meters per second, which is usable information to help an athlete determine what their top end speed. I asked him the question, what's more important, acceleration or top end? He said top end. And he gave some great reasons why. And I believe, as someone who's coached a couple of athletes myself, top end is it wins. It wins. Acceleration gets you going. Top end keeps you going. And top end, there's many benefits to being fast. We know that within the context of a sport, you're not always running top end. He gave a great answer, and here's mine. When an athlete is on a field and they have improved their capacity to run faster, guess what? They're able to run at a submaximal pace and get less fatigued because their ceiling has been raised. And when that ceiling's raised, it's like a car that was built to run 150 miles an hour. And now you improve that car, the engine, the horsepower in the engine to go 200. Well, before at 150, that car might have been like, you heard some clunky sounds. You heard how hard the engine was working. But now that thing rides at 200. So at 150 is a breeze. It's easy. It's easy. The engine's not working nearly as hard at 150. Well, that's what happens on the field. When you've increased that overall velocity and your top end speed, you can be running sub-maximal and you're running faster and you're not working nearly as hard because you've built up what's called a speed reserve. I hope you dig into this information. It's been phenomenal. We've got this 4-part series. I'm looking forward to it. The next one's going to be on velocity-based training. Stay with us. In the meantime, in between time, please go over to iTunes, pull up Coach Carlisle's Pursuit of Excellence podcast. Please like, share, download, subscribe. It would really, really help us. You make it a great day. And again, thank you for tuning in.